Okay, good morning, everybody. We warmly welcome you to this first public forum of the new BrIAS program. We have a full day ahead, but before we start our discussions, we would like to say a few words of introduction. We'll do that in English for the introduction, but the rest of the day will be all mixed in terms of languages. There's going to be French, Dutch, English. You speak the language that you're the most comfortable with. We distributed at the entrance a printout of the slides. Should English not be your most familiar language, you have printouts in French and in Dutch. Although you have to have really good eyes to be able to read what's printed. We will start with welcoming words from the authorities of our respective universities, ULB, VUB, welcoming us today, and of the BrIAS Institute. So let me first welcome Marius Gilbert as Vice Rector of Research for ULB.
But this, if I may. Do you have slides as well? No, it's just. Good morning, everyone. I wanted to make this speech a little bit more special than a simple formal introduction, because the theme that you are addressing today is a theme that is very important to me. And I couldn't resist to recycle a text that I had published in Le Soir in some of my columns. And I've translated it in English. What is extraordinary about scientific research is that it never ends. There is no final state, no moment when everything has been discovered, everything understood, when we can stop searching and say, this is it, Eureka, I finally found the cure for the cancer, the model to explain all fundamental forces, the solution for energy needs. Some may find it rather depressing to dedicate one's life to a project that has no real chance of ever being completed. Or on the contrary, one can consider that being a researcher is like many other professions. People make a living by continuously returning to their work, finding fulfillment in the many small or great satisfactions that mark their path. As the philosopher Simone Weil wrote in her Factory Journal about jobs that she believed were meaningful, it is possible to perceive their use, their modified nature, and to make one's work as an object of contemplation. Knowledge is also an extraordinary in that. As long as it can be shared and preserved, it accumulates and is added to in a vast collective construction. Every scientist stands on the shoulders of giants who came before, and can therefore more easily view their contribution fitting in a cumulative path of progress. But this very progressive view of the tremendous acceleration of knowledge over the past century stands in stark contrast to today's general sense of global stagnation or even regression. Certainly, we have a natural tendency to amplify news that cause worry and to overlook the slow but very real progress that rarely make headlines. Yet, in the recent years, it is hard to ignore the sense of blockage, stagnation, or even backsliding that our societies are facing. We thought we had conquered nature, but the pandemic, the threats to ecosystems and climate change have reminded us of the urgent need to invent and implement new paradigms so that technological progresses are no longer synonymous with destructions and can turn against us. We thought we had access to mineral and energy resources that would guarantee a materially comfortable future. Yet we are reaching the limits of a finite material world, forcing us to identify alternatives in terms of exploitation and management. Following the European project, we believe we were moving toward a convergence of nations around peaceful democratic societies. But in the past decades, conflicts have erupted or re-erupted in various parts of the world, and more unexpectedly, indicators now show that democracy is in retreat. Perhaps we have too hastily assumed that Western democratic models were somehow complete, and with a certain Western arrogance, concluded that the best way to advance human rights was for other countries to simply follow the lead. Every country would then by the end of a trajectory, would have its parliament, its elected official, its judiciary, legislative, and executive branches. Everything seemed to work just fine. Why should we change anything? Except that many democratic countries do not seem to prioritize such a political evolution. And some are even thriving economically. And some of their leaders have clearly understood the advantage that they can draw from democracies that are weakening from inside. Disinformation campaigns, interferences in elections to support far-right or populist groups, the maintenance of conflicts that heighten migration pressure, the divide and rule geopolitics from Russia is alive and well. In the US and in Europe, populism is rising, becoming more alarming by the day as it feeds on scapegoating others, the poor, the migrants, the others, as threats driving us from further peaceful coexistence and collective solutions to major contemporary challenges. But why should we view our democratic model as a final product, only to be improved at the margins? Shouldn't we, like many other human systems, continuously adjust it according to its intended function, question its limits, its flaws, and its imperfections, and modify it so it becomes more robust and better able to withstand crisis, disinformation, and external conflicts? And start by recognizing that there is a difference between democracy as it exists and the democratic ideal that a society aspires to. The pandemic revealed many of our society's weaknesses: the quality of healthcare systems, educational and socioeconomic inequalities, and a lack of trust all played a major role in how effectively countries responded. Doesn't the rise of populism highlight the growing disconnect between slowly evolving Western democratic models and societies that are constantly transforming their norms and expectations? The democratic ideal, like the pursuit of knowledge, is simply a never-ending horizon, a goal of progress, a direction a society chooses to move forward. We are standing on the shoulders of the visionaries who invented and improved the democratic system we benefit from. Perhaps we've spent too long enjoying the view, and it's time to lift the next generation onto our shoulders so they can see further than we ever could. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will now welcome first Frank de Koning from the VUB, who is co-director of BrIAS, the Brussels Institute for Advanced Studies.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be able to address you at this first forum concerning the new theme of BrIAS. Let me say a few words about what the Brussels Institute for Advanced Studies is. The battery is running low, it says. Do I have to... Yeah, but no, it doesn't want to continue. This is the problem. I will first try to close this. Yes, okay. So it all started in 2018 when the former rectors of ULB and VUB decided to create this institute. And they asked my colleague Serge Jaumin from ULB and myself to put this on rails. And the reason was to stimulate R&D ideas and foster collaboration between the two universities. So we had to find some inspiration. And our first source, I would say, obvious source of inspiration are the Solvay conferences. You probably all know this picture where all those scientists are sitting around a table with Solvay in the middle, and you see Marie Curie, Einstein, and all the others. The picture I show you here is probably not known to you. It's the draft of a word of thanks to the then King Albert. And you see all the signatures on this paper: Marie Curie, Einstein, Lorentz, Rutherford, etc., etc. And the incredible thing about the Solvay conferences is that Solvay decided to invite scientists from different disciplines for a rather long period, a few weeks, so that they could meet each other, discuss, disagree, live together, etc. And the idea was that if you create such an environment, then new ideas may be generated. And this, of course, is what happens. And we also try to offer such an environment. The second source of inspiration was obviously the Princeton Institute for Advanced Studies. You have to realize that in 1930, the year after the big crash, in the US, there were no funds really available for research. This was one point. The second point was that Jewish people would not be appointed in places like Harvard, Stanford, Columbia, etc., etc. They were allowed to work for on a voluntary basis, but they would not be appointed. So this family created the Princeton Institute just to provide them with a haven where they could work without any hassles, just on every subject they wanted to create, to have ideas and to do their research. And we had at least two Belgian fellows of the Princeton Institute, Jean Bourguin, who was from VUB, whom in fact I had as a student, which sadly enough he passed away, and then Pierre Deligne. And of course the picture of Einstein when he was living in the Han just before he left for the US. So the idea was then to create BrIAS as an institute for brainstorming and for networking, where we could, according to the philosophy of both our founding universities, work in a complete atmosphere of complete freedom without any taboos, where we put together scientists, high-level scientists from different disciplines, different cultural backgrounds, just to discuss around a theme, agree, disagree, and we hope that once in a while some ideas will come out of it. So what is our scientific motivation? Well, for the fellows, it's time to pursue research, write articles, discuss, etc., in a quiet atmosphere. For our researchers, and collaborations, mutual emulation, cross-fertilization, and for everyone, it's, I would say, to go from this tunnel vision, which is hyper-specialized research, to open it to a 360-degree view by bringing people together from different disciplines who would normally not meet each other at congresses. They may have difficulties understanding each other in the beginning because it's not because you use the same words that they have the same meaning. But after a while, you start discussing, etc., and you get disruptive concepts, ideas, discoveries. There is also, of course, a political motivation. It's to foster the collaboration between the two universities, to foster the collaboration with the Utopia and Civis University alliances, international collaborations, and the image and prestige of the Brussels area. BrIAS is not just another institute of advanced studies. There are others. We were the first one in Belgium, but there are many in other countries, and now there is one at the KU Leuven too. Again, potentially controversial subjects. When you are at ULB or VUB, you know that this is one of the part of the DNA of the universities. We welcome researchers who are in danger, and unfortunately, there are more today than there were a few years ago. And we've also emphasized cooperation with countries that normally have less financial means to go on sabbatical, etc., countries from the global south. Now, one of the particularities of what we do is interdisciplinarity, absolutely interdisciplinarity. And we know that as fake news continues to rise at the expense of fact-checking, we really believe that interdisciplinary can play a crucial role in the sense that it can advance science, certainly, generate unexpected breakthroughs, certainly, but maybe also, and this is what we hope, restore some public trust in scientifically validated knowledge, because it doesn't come from one source, which they then will call a lobbying organization, but, it comes from different sources. In the past, we had up to now some 100 fellows, 76 seniors, 24 juniors fellows, and we will have many more, and 3 resident artists. They came from lots of universities all over the world, and they stayed here. And when I say here, it's both there and on the floors over there for 2, 3, up now to 5 months. We also had resident artists. When you talk about art in a scientific environment, some people say, well, why? Well, the view artists have about a problem is very often totally different from our scientific approach and disturbing. And they generate, I would say, opinions which really make us think about what we do. So what we saw with the 3 artists until now we had, Christopher Donk, David Brunet, and Guillaume Slijewicz, is that this extra layer of inspiration and creativity really helps the scientist, but also the artist in the other way. So it's certainly something we will continue. Another specificity of BrIAS is that all our talks are broadcasted via the BrIAS YouTube channel. In 21-23, the theme was the past, present, and future of food, climate, and sustainability. In 24-25, and I think Emanuele will talk about this, the theme was robots, AI, and automation. The current theme is democratic governance, and we wish you a very inspiring forum.
Frank mentioned BrIAS was founded in 2018. There's been several programs already, and we have the pleasure to welcome Emanuele Garrone, who is the previous co-director of the previous program, to explain to us what the BrIAS family is all about.
So, hello everybody. By the way, if you think that one person running from one side of the other of the room with a charger is something unheard of at BrIAS, I can tell you it's absolutely normal. So you will pass 2 years very often doing this kind of things, because there will always be some unforeseen. So be prepared to the unforeseen. Most of the time, actually, the unforeseen brings something good. So it's a great thing. So I'll try to be brief, because there is much more interesting things to say today. So I don't want to just make a lot of blah 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 on something that now it's already in the past. So first of all, I want to speak very rapidly about the program we already had, and also which are the connections with the next one. As a first thing, let me also tell you that with me there should have been my colleague Anne from VUB. Unfortunately, she could not be here today, but she sends her regards. So we started in 2024 with the theme of robotics as enabler or disablers for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Now, this was a very special year because we were still in modality where this building was not ready yet. So we were kind of a moving circus, moving in various places around the campus. But that was a great experience because we made so many mistakes. And then when we moved here, we knew what we needed for the AV system, for the YouTube, for how to organize things. So it was anyway a great experience. And I think it was also a quite successful one. We had a certain amount of fellows from all over the world that really animated a fantastic season with a lot of different departments of the two universities involved, more than 20 colleagues that in one way or another were involved in the program, and the organization of various events. I want just to give some highlight. So for the first time, we had an event in collaboration with Belgian industry. That was an industrial forum on robotics for maintenance and decommissioning of nuclear facilities, which is an interesting subject where sometimes technology can give a better solution than what we do today. And then we also, and these were, I think, very important highlight of the season, we started having events where we were not wanting to see a problem just from the technology, robotics, engineering viewpoint, but also from different perspectives. So we had a first forum on agriculture in which we involved also the previous program that was on agriculture. Now this was speaking about policy and importance of politics in all of this. This happened in the very same day of the protest with the tractors that blocked Brussels. So this gives you an idea that we are always on the piece. We are always speaking of things that might be far away, like robotics in agriculture, and then they become the highlight of the moment. And this was a first event that really showed us, okay, we have to go even more for multidisciplinarity. We have to go even more to have different viewpoints from the industry, from the civil society, from the university, and the university from all the faculties. We went even more wild in the very same year to say we don't want to speak about technological solutionism, which is one of the big things that us as engineers we are always accused of. We have actually to think about which are the good things that can come out of the technology and which are the challenges and the risks. So we had these 2 days on war and peace and how robotics is changing it. Now, I imagine you have seen what happened 3 days ago in Ukraine. It's easy to see how it happens in a negative viewpoint, but we also had a lot of discussion on how robotics can help. For instance, we had an entire day on demining, on how robotics can avoid losing people when trying to reclaim land. So this was the first year, and during this first year, we had a lot of nice experiences, and then we decided to enlarge even a little bit more the field, and not speaking only of robotics, but also of AI and automation or control, if you prefer. This was the season that just ended last week. So this is my first event here at BrIAS where I'm not in charge. I'm very happy about that. Now it's your problems, ladies. So we had more or less the same number of senior fellows, all researchers of top level from various fields. We had 4 main teams. I will not go in the details. I mean, it's not so interesting. What I think it's interesting is to understand a little bit which were the goals, because I think it's very much aligned with which are the goals also today and in the next few years. That is, on the one hand, we want to be a place where we foster new ideas, possibly crazy. So this is a place where it's nice to go wild. And it's the reason why we have these international fellows. We do seminars every week and so on. But at the very same time, we want to help young researchers. And this is the reason why we have junior fellows that sometimes they are a little bit overworked because there is always something to be run here. But it's a great experience to be in contact with these big researchers from all over the world, and to become a meeting point for the scientific community. So we have also organized conferences. I will speak about it very shortly. And as we are doing today, to have public forums, because we don't want to be an institute for advanced studies that is a playground for smart people. We want to be something that is open to the society and that interacts with it. So in 2025, we have, for the first time, 2 scientific conferences in the strict sense with the people submitting their contribution and presenting them. They were both extremely successful, one on agriculture, that somehow it has been a recurring theme, and the other on battery management systems. And we also had a series of forums on different subjects that I think you will touch again in different ways in the next 2 years. So this is just to give you an overview. What is nice about this place is that it's a place where, one, you want to have fun, so please come here.
Vandaag die in het teken staat van democratie. Dat de democratie vandaag uitgedaagd wordt, is misschien nog zacht uitgedrukt. We hoorden de visrector ook daarnet al een aantal voorbeelden geven. En zelfs in gevestigde democratieën zien we hoe democratische normen lijken af te brokkelen. Het vertrouwen in instellingen wankelt. Een groep van burgers is ontgoocheld en stelt zich de vraag of democratie nog wel in staat is om aan de verwachtingen te voldoen. En tegelijkertijd winnen autoritaire figuren en ideeën aan kracht. Juist daarom is onafhankelijk onderzoek naar de uitdagingen en de toekomst van democratie vandaag belangrijker en urgenter dan ooit. We moeten niet alleen begrijpen wat er precies misloopt, maar ook nadenken over hoe we democratie kunnen vernieuwen en versterken met het oog op de toekomst. En de komende 2 jaar willen wij hier samen met de hele BrIAS-familie, de BrIAS-gemeenschap, heel graag op een betekenisvolle manier aan bijdragen. En vandaag willen we u al heel graag even een eerste inkijk geven in onze plannen voor de komende 2 jaren. Zoals jullie misschien weten, draait of zal het BrIAS-programma rond democratisch bestuur zich richten op wat wij noemen 4 grote uitdagingen van democratieën vandaag. Een eerste uitdaging, en jullie zien ze hier op de slide, een eerste uitdaging is polarisatie, populisme en geweld. De vraag hoe groeiende politieke en maatschappelijke tegenstellingen de fundamenten van democratische samenleving, zoals pluralisme en tolerantie, hoe dat die worden ondermijnd. Tweede belangrijke uitdaging, korte termijn denken en duurzaamheid. De vraag hoe we democratieën beter kunnen wapenen, dat is misschien een slechte woordkeuze, maar om met lange termijn uitdagingen, zoals bijvoorbeeld klimaatverandering, begrotingstekorten, sociale duurzaamheid, om daarmee om te gaan en daarbij ook oog te hebben voor de belangen van toekomstige generaties. Derde uitdaging, technologie, desinformatie en artificiële intelligentie. Welke impact hebben digitale technologieën en sociale media op democratische processen? En hoe kunnen democratie zich weerbaar opstellen tegen desinformatie, opiniebeïnvloeding en de opkomst van AI, zonder daarbij uiteraard het vrije debat, en nog telkens daarbij uiteraard, of zonder daarbij het vrije debat te beknotten. En dan laatste uitdaging, ongelijkheid en inclusie. Hoe kunnen democratieën structurele ongelijkheden in zaken inkomen, rijkdom, gender, etniciteit, sociale klasse enzovoort, hoe kunnen ze die aanpakken en zo hun legitimiteit versterken? En doorheen die 4 grote uitdagingen loopt ook een rode draad. De rode draad die de vraag stelt naar democratische vernieuwing en innovaties. Hoe kunnen we democratie gaan herdenken en hervormen, zodat ze beter in staat zijn om deze 4 grote uitdagingen aan te pakken?
Alors pour réaliser ce programme ambitieux, mais on n'est pas toute seule, évidemment. Chacun de nos work packages est l'idée ou dirigé par 2 work package leaders. L'idée, c'est de faire des équipes interuniversitaires. Donc, il y a chaque fois dans les équipes, dans les duos, un ou une chercheur académique de l'ULB et l'autre de la VUB. Pour le premier work package, c'est Jasper Van Alstein de l'ULB et Bram Spreut de la VUB. C'est aussi des duos interdisciplinaires. Donc, ça, c'est aussi l'idée de mixer les disciplines. Pour le Work Package 2, c'est Louise Knops de l'ULB et Didier Caluarts de la VUB. Work Package 3, Caroline Claus de l'ULB, Ike Picone de la VUB. Et Work Package 4, Daniel Zamora de l'ULB, Karen Selis de la VUB, et puis Sylvia et moi-même pour les aspects plus transversaux. L'idée, c'est vraiment d'avoir des équipes interdisciplinaires, hein, comme on l'a montré, c'est de mettre ensemble des chercheurs, des chercheuses qui travaillent en sciences politiques, en sociologie, en droit, mais aussi en architecture, en polytechnique, études européennes, études de genre, psychologie, donc aller vraiment dans toutes les disciplines pour attaquer cette thématique de la gouvernance démocratique. On va aussi organiser beaucoup d'activités. Donc l'idée, c'est à la fois d'avoir ce programme de Visiting Fellows qui fait venir à BrIAS toute une série de chercheurs de renom à l'international. L'idée, c'est d'avoir des personnes qui nous font réfléchir dans l'esprit de liberté intellectuelle que Franck a mis en évidence. On aura une série de séminaires hebdomadaires avec des thématiques régulières, avec à la fois des invités internationaux, en lien avec nos thématiques centrales de recherche, mais aussi des chercheurs plus juniors pour favoriser ces échanges. Des workshops, bien sûr, des écoles d'été aussi qui seront hébergées, et puis une série de ce qu'on a appelé Big Ideas for Democracy, des conférences avec nos fellows de renom. On a aussi voulu travailler à ces thématiques de la démocratie en pratique à travers des forums publics. C'est l'idée de ce qu'on a organisé aujourd'hui, c'est-à-dire qu'on veut mettre ensemble évidemment des académiques de différentes disciplines, mais aussi des membres de la société civile organisés pour pouvoir discuter ensemble de la démocratie aussi en pratique et pouvoir alimenter nos réflexions de ce qu'il se passe en réalité sur le terrain. À la fin du programme, on organisera également une conférence internationale. Donc, il y a plein d'activités prévues, aussi des activités centrées autour de l'art, de l'architecture et de la démocratie, puisqu'on pense qu'il y a aussi beaucoup d'impact ou de connexion entre art, démocratie et architecture. Le rôle de la ville ou des villes dans la résilience démocratique, c'est une autre thématique un peu transversale qu'on veut explorer. Mais l'idée du forum aujourd'hui, c'est aussi de prendre vos idées et une opportunité pour vous d'exprimer vos idées, votre créativité. L'idée, c'est aussi de pouvoir, à la fin de la journée, arriver avec une liste de thématiques qui vous feront revenir ici au courant des 2 années qui vont venir. Aujourd'hui, l'idée, c'était, à travers ce forum public, de faire venir, bien sûr, des membres de la société civile, comme on l'a dit, en lien avec cette thématique de la gouvernance démocratique, des membres aussi des administrations publiques et des académiques pour discuter. Donc, les workshops, et Justine vous expliquera dans un instant comment on va fonctionner, parce que vous allez travailler, maintenant vous avez beaucoup écouté, mais vous allez aussi vous exprimer, c'est de discuter des principaux défis auxquels la démocratie fait face aujourd'hui, d'essayer de les identifier, ces défis, essayer de poser des questions, les questions qui vous titillent, les questions qui vous semblent urgentes, auxquelles il faut apporter des réponses et auxquelles on pourrait s'intéresser dans les 2 années qui viennent. Et l'idée aussi, c'est aussi de se mettre en réseau et de constituer cette famille BrIAS autour de la question de la démocratie. Je pense que beaucoup d'entre vous se connaissent déjà, mais qu'il y a des liens aussi à créer. Il y a peut-être des personnes qui ne sont pas là aujourd'hui, qui devraient être là et que vous pouvez amener à travers vos réseaux. C'est l'idée aussi de la journée. Donc, on n'a pas prévu des grandes présentations et des longs séminaires. On a prévu des courts duos de présentation, des duos qui combinent des membres de la société civile et des académiques, chaque fois sur chacune de nos sous-thématiques. Et ensuite, des ateliers qui seront organisés et pilotés par notre Policy Lab. Et Justine Brunet en est la pilote pour aujourd'hui.
En tant donc, que bonne pilote, je vais vous expliquer un petit peu ce qu'on vous a prévu pour aujourd'hui. Donc, comme le disait Émilie, il va y avoir d'abord toute une série de présentations à chaque fois d'un duo académique et plutôt praticien société civile sur les différentes thématiques qui vont faire l'objet d'un travail en workshop par après. Donc ce matin, on aura les 3 premières thématiques jusqu'ici. À 10h45, vous aurez le temps de prendre un petit café, un petit thé avant de nous rejoindre dans les différentes salles de workshop pour partir sur 1h30 de réflexion sur les différentes thématiques. Au départ de vos expériences, et comme le disait Émilie, c'est vraiment vos savoirs d'expérience qu'on va mobiliser pour pouvoir discuter sur ces différentes thématiques. Alors, en termes de salle, c'est plutôt simple. Vous avez tout ce qui est court-termisme et durabilité juste ici en bas, et tout le reste est en haut. Donc, il faut simplement monter les escaliers, et puis les animateurs seront là pour vous accueillir et vous guider pour que vous soyez au bon endroit au bon moment. Donc, on a effectivement ce premier workshop du matin qui va prendre part de 11h à 12h30. Puis, il y a effectivement un lunch pour tout le monde. Et puis, on recommence, vous voyez, la dynamique est la même le matin et l'après-midi. On recommence avec ces présentations en duo sur les 2 dernières thématiques de la journée. Là, c'est aussi simple en termes de salle, mais on vous le répétera en temps voulu. Tout ce qui est inégalité et inclusion, ce sera juste ici en bas. Et tous ceux qui sont sur Democratic Innovation, ce sera via l'escalier en haut. Et donc voilà, pareil, on repartira de vos savoirs d'expérience pour un deuxième workshop. Une petite coffee break avant la dernière animation de la journée, où pour ceux qui auront l'occasion de rester jusque-là, on vous a prévu des tables de discussion avec une mécanique complètement différente des workshops qui ont pour objectif justement de pouvoir faire un peu plus réseau. Donc vous verrez, on a prévu toute une série d'activités pour pouvoir avoir une carte assez claire de qui compose ce réseau BrIAS, mais aussi de pouvoir discuter, comme l'avait dit Émilie, de quelles sont vos attentes pour le programme pour les 2 prochaines années, que ce soit en termes d'intervenants, de thématiques dont on pourrait traiter, comment est-ce qu'on peut donner suite à la journée d'aujourd'hui dès maintenant, qu'est-ce qu'on peut activer. Donc c'est toutes des choses qui vont faire l'objet d'une animation qui aura lieu de 16 à 17h, où là, vous verrez, il y a 3 espaces qui sont prévus. Pour le premier tour de 25 minutes, vous serez invité à aller à un espace, et puis au bout de 25 minutes, vous serez invité à aller à un second espace. Vous passerez donc sur 2 des 3 tables de discussion, mais tout ça reste pendant le drink, donc si vous voulez passer à la table à laquelle vous n'avez pas pu aller, c'est tout à fait possible. Mais donc voilà, on aura ces discussion tables, et puis un moment de conclusion qui aura lieu ici par l'équipe BrIAS, et puis un drink où vous pourrez découvrir ce qui a été fait sur les différentes tables de discussion et pouvoir encore réseauter au besoin avec les gens que vous n'auriez pas croisés en workshop ou pendant ces tables de discussion. Ça, c'est pour l'organisation de la journée. L'équipe Polysylab a un necklace qui vous permet de savoir que c'est l'équipe qui anime la journée. Et donc, si vous avez des questions sur l'organisation, vous n'hésitez pas. Donc, de toute façon, nous, on sera là pour vous rappeler où aller et vous guider aux bons endroits. Ça va ? Ok, bah alors je laisse la suite pour les présentations.
Dan gaan we nu graag... I'm going to switch to English. Yeah. Well, dan gaan we nu graag verder met de eerste duo-presentaties van vandaag. En die staan in het kader of in het teken van het thema polarisatie, populisme en geweld. En ik nodig heel graag professor Eva Jaspers uit van de Universiteit van Utrecht. En dan straks ook Maarten Alstein van het Vlaams Vredesinstitutt.
Bonjour, merci de me permettre de parler ici. En bedankt dat ik hier mag spreken. And I'll switch to English now. As the most inclusive language, hopefully. And also the language that I'm most comfortable actually discussing my work in. I really would like to have the presenter mode. So I can see my notes. Yeah. It was quite a challenge to be asked to talk about polarization in 10 minutes. I could talk about the topic for 10 hours. I hope I can talk very quickly, so that might help. But I hope that there will be some ideas that I can present here. As 2 weeks ago, I organized a conference on polarization myself, a very interdisciplinary conference, and I'm just going to give you the 3 main ideas or topics that I got from this conference. Sorry, an error occurred. Well, let's ignore that one. So, my name is Eva Jaspers. I am a sociologist and I study polarization as well. So the first thing I want to share with you today is that we overestimate the level of polarization in society. And to make sure there is no, so polarization to some extent is a function of healthy democracies, right? So the conflict between ideas is something that we cherish and value, but when and we call it effective polarization. So when people start thinking in terms of us and them and start to dislike people on the basis of their perceived ideas, then we might have a problem in society. But why do we overestimate polarization? Well, first of all, we rely on biased data. So we often use data, especially nowadays, from or online data, where we perceive much more polarization than we have in real life. Online, the people that share their views are the ones that are most extreme, care most about the topics, and are more likely to attack others. So then we have biased beliefs because we believe that others are more radical than they actually are, right? So if we belong to a certain group ourselves, we often base our view of the other on a single network contact that we have, right? We all have one uncle that we disagree with, right? And people then say, well, or the aunt, and say, yeah, but most people actually talk about their uncles, not their aunts, when it's the person that they disagree with. I don't know why that is. Someone could study that. So we base our whole idea of how radical the others are on this one person that we know. And so our beliefs about the other group are biased. And then finally, the media that we consume focuses on polarization. It's a very hot topic, at least so I'm not so sure about the Belgian context. I'm sorry, but at least in the Netherlands, we have different polarizations every year, apparently. So now the big one is between the countryside and the city, right? We're clearly polarized, and just today there was a big report showing that actually there is no real divide between the countryside and the city. But we've been talking about this for 3 years now. But also because media spends a lot of time discussing the US case, which is a country where, in fact, there is increasing polarization. But when you look at different countries, there are also countries where polarization is actually decreasing, not increasing. We need to look at our offline networks, and I'm not saying this only because I study networks, offline networks, but also because these are the contexts where we talk about issues that we are concerned about. So when we look at offline networks, so the people that we have and meet in our daily life and that we interact with, we are actually mostly integrated. So even the most extreme people have in their intimate circles people that are very moderate. And in fact, radicals have more diverse networks in terms of opinions than do moderates. So moderates tend to stick together. They might know one radical, but they keep them very separate from the rest of their networks, whereas radicals are actually the ones doing the integration. So how do we deal with that? We have various strategies to deal with conflict or extremism in our networks, and one of them is avoidance. So we tend to avoid topics where we think that others might disagree with us, especially when they're ones that are close to us. But closeness is also something that enables us to discuss things, even when we disagree, right? So we mostly talk about things with close alters, and the problem is if these authors are very close to us already in their views and opinion. We tend to solidify these opinions, right? We do not regress to whatever, or we do not move around the whole spectrum, which might actually hamper regression to the mean or finding some middle ground. So I'm being very quick, right? Yes, because now I have only 5 minutes. So network segregation does occur, and it may actually be very harmful, but not necessarily for the reason you think, right? So if we all live in our own bubbles, and yes, there are filter bubbles do exist online to some extent. They're much less there offline. Although if I had to say name one bubble, it would be us, right? So higher educated people. We have our own bubble more than anyone. And for instance, when I look around at my department, I have a department with 17 nationalities, 4 different religions, 3 different genders, 3 different sexual orientations, many different ages, but we're all higher educated and we basically all think the same. Yeah, so the bubble is us. So there is some network segregation, and that can be harmful. And avoidance can actually be good, right? Avoiding a certain topic, right? Not discussing this with your uncle at the birthday party may hold the family together. So it's not always the best idea to discuss things. But perceived polarization may actually increase real segregation, right? If we perceive that others are very different and that they are immoral and should be disliked, that may result in actual moving away from others that we disagree with. But contact is not necessarily a good thing, right? So context may actually exacerbate existing divides because of repulsion mechanisms, right? So if you do engage with your uncle, on a certain topic, this might lead not to integration, but actually to further repulsion, right? If you talk to just one person who is very far from your own views, then this may result in a move away from finding middle ground. So, and actually, what research is also indicating is that polarization is not necessarily new. So the extent to which we differ in our views is not very different from how we differed in our views, let's say 50 years ago, right? So there has always been this, a certain level of polarization, and I always, for the Netherlands, we have this very long trend of asking people since the 1970s, the survey question, there are people that I have started to hate for their political opinions. And there were more people agreeing with this in the 1970s than there are today, right? So polarization is not new, but the way we express it may be. And one thought that I left my own conference with is that the norms that we have that govern how we interact with others with opposing views may have changed because when there is segregation, right, so if we live in an integrated group, we tend to be more careful how we phrase things. We tend to think of, well, the other people might not really like it if I call their position stupid, right? And we tend to be a bit more like hesitant, trying to also understand the other. If we if this perceived polarization indeed leads us to segregate, we live in communities where these norms actually erode. So where we feel free to speak out, say whatever we want, and that may, lead to some vicious cycle where we perceive more polarization because people are more outspoken, leading to more repulsion, etc. So that was it from me. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Hartelijk dank. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Maarten, ja.
I just have a decor.
All right. Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm a researcher at the Flemish Peace Institute, and we are a research institute linked to the Flemish Parliament, but we are really geared toward doing practice-oriented research and policy-oriented research. So I work a lot for, let's say, teachers and educational professionals. And I was quite intrigued by this link, populism, polarization, populism, violence. So I was thinking about a way to tackle the linkages between these three, because these are very big concepts, rather too big. They pop up a lot in discussions and workshops with teachers as well. I am a peace researcher, but also a historian, so I thought I'm going to jump back in history and maybe tell 3 very short stories to get these two big concepts a little bit into perspective. And I was just told this morning that we can be wild here, so I feel no threshold to engage in a too wild roller coaster of a historical time lapse. So pardon me for being too short on all these very, very complex historical themes. The first one, and I want to start with the linkages between the 3 concepts, always starting from one of the 3. Maybe the first I would start with violence. And of course, one of the big historical topics for historians of Western Europe is the terror of 1793, where we have the Jacobins, Robespierre, Saint-Just, talking about the people coming to power, which ends in extreme violence, 40,000 people decapitated on guillotines. Very polarized, of course, but in a very toxic, pernicious way. There's all kinds of critique coming from conservative and liberal historians on why the terror happened. I have a very complex view on that, so don't quote me as being too simple on this. But the interesting thing is here that we have this very monolithical idea of the people, very polarized and very violent. Now, Jacob Tallman wrote a wonderful book decades ago on the origins of totalitarian democracy, which is a very interesting oxymoron, of course. And he views that here with this Jacobin moment, this is the first step towards what he calls totalitarian democracy in a Bolshevik or communist sense. So where we have the people as a monolith in a totalitarian view. One might add, of course, that fascism in its way is also a form of totalitarian democracy, in the sense that ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer is a very toxic way of doing populism, of course. So we have the 3 ways of linking populism, violence, and polarization in very toxic ways. Second short story. This is a very fast time lapse. Although I will start in 1830 with the Belgian Constitution, and I quote from the Belgian Constitution, namely Article 33, which is kind of an enigma for a lot of legal scholars, I must suspect. And this article says, all powers emanate from the nation. Do we have a nationalist constitution? I do not think so. I think the term nation here was meant to refer to popular sovereignty. So we have some kind of populism here as well, a liberal constitutional form of populism, which is interesting to have a more complex view of populism. However, of course, we all know how exclusionist these liberal constitutions were. Laborers, women, colonial subjects were not part of this constitutional order in their full capacity. So what did we see? End of the 19th century, the women's vote, activist movements who actually did polarize. They certainly from the view of the white gentlemen who were part of the establishment, they polarized. They were so radical. Second instance, in the 1950s and 60s, the civil rights movement in the United States, which also polarized in a way, in a very democratic way. They wanted to become part of the constitutional people. And I would suggest they were largely nonviolent. There are arguments here, and I will just pop it in there and see where it gets me. For instance, in the work of Hannah Arendt, there is one of the very interesting, what I would call a liberal blind spot in her work. She says that the situation has become so dangerous in the course of the 60s because there were black students' movement who tended towards violence. And she feared a major violent backlash from white supremacists. Of course, this is, for me, it's a blind spot. This is the world turned upside down. It's complete negation of the totalitarian violence maybe committed against colonial subjects and former slaves in the United States. What these movements did, they wanted to become part of the constitutional people, in my view. So again, what we have here is some form of constitutional populism, you might add. People want a more enlarged view of the people. They want to be part of that. They want to have equal rights. They polarize, but in a democratic way. And largely non-violence. So this is another story. Now I come to my third story, which is the present. My time lapse is going well, I think. I've been reading over the past 2 days an article in The New Yorker by Eva Kaufman. Very interesting, but also very disturbing, I think. It's a profile on Curtis Yarvin. I don't know if that name rings a bell. For many people, he is a software developer, but also some kind of a self-declared philosopher of new authoritarianism in the United States. What Curtis Yarvin is pleading for is a new monarchy. He wants just he calls it in his own words, US democracy must be destroyed, and we need a total reboot of the social order. Smaller countries with kind of corporations with a CEO as the king. In terms of universities, if you want to be put at ease, quote unquote, what he's saying is, and this also explains the attack on Harvard University, one of his quotes, the idea that you're going to be a Caesar, so the king, CEO, with someone else's department of reality in operation is just manifestly absurd. This is, again, a very, I would say, pernicious form of polarization, where, and Eva Kaufman, the journalist, calls it the window of Overton. So the boundaries of acceptable speech are really pushed outwardly here. What we have here is some kind of a polarization that is pernicious and toxic, and it makes it acceptable to plead for a non-democracy, an autocracy. Now, I'm not going to say that this person is a direct influence on Donald Trump, but he makes certain kind of speech acceptable in the US, certainly on the alt-right, and also within circles of the Trump administration. The link with populism is a bit strange here, as is actually with Donald Trump, in my view, who is, of course, an elitist, and on the one hand, favors tax cuts and so on, but on the other hand has this strange form of populism as well. My point here is, if we recapitulate the three stories, the three short stories, on the one hand, in the Jacobin moment and the totalitarian form of democracy, where, in the words of Michael Mann, the demos becomes an ethnos, exclusionary, you have toxic, pernicious forms of polarization and populism, and they become violent. The second story was more democratic forms of populism and polarization, and they were non-violent. What is happening now? That is the big challenge, I think, and instead of, let's say, three questions, three challenges, I put them in one big question, and which is also, I think, the challenge, and I will conclude with that, and that is the following question: how can we organize our society in ways that polarization and the tensions between the people and the elites, which are actually inevitable forces in society, how can we make sure that these forces, polarization and forms of populism, remain democratic and non-violent and do not turn into toxic or pernicious forms of polarization and populism, because we know from history that these dynamics can turn very, very violent indeed. Thank you very much.